I feel like Sniper Wolf is the most important character in Metal Gear Solid apart from Snake, and that's because she's the key to understanding Snake's relationship to his father, Big Boss. Snake had actually killed his father on the battlefield sometime before the incident at Shadow Moses, and this seems to have traumatized him because it caused him to go into temporary retirement from his life as a soldier. And for most of the story of Metal Gear Solid, that's really all we know about Big Boss and Snake's relationship to him. But then things changed during our final confrontation with Sniper Wolf, because we learned from her that she knew Big Boss, and indeed she was almost like his adoptive daughter. According to the story that Sniper Wolf tells us, she was originally born into a genocide where her people were the victims of the atrocity, and the horrors that her people suffered were also a kind of open secret that was ignored by the global community. And the young Sniper Wolf was forced to bear witness as members of her family died day after day. But then at some point, Big Boss entered the conflict as a stateless mercenary, and there he met Sniper Wolf, and he decided to save her by taking her into his camp. Big Boss would go on to raise Sniper Wolf as a child soldier. Indeed, he trained her as a sniper, and he therefore allowed her to transform her relationship to the violence into which she was born. She now witnessed it not as a victim, but as an agent who could direct and judge it through the scope of her rifle. And I think this entire story reveals something very important about Snake's father, Big Boss. I don't want to say that Big Boss is a hero exactly, because a stateless mercenary who accepts child soldiers into his fold is obviously a little bit suspect. But on the other hand, there can be no doubt that Sniper Wolf herself regarded him as a hero. She idolized him as a savior, because he was the only person who was willing to give her any agency at all in a society that had deemed her life to be forfeit. And during the time that Sniper Wolf was serving Big Boss as one of his soldiers, she also felt that she was fighting for a cause that mattered. Which of course is not to say that she was fighting with Big Boss to create some kind of morally good utopia. Because again, they were soldiers who lived for war, but they did fight for a vision of the stateless soldiers' utopia. They fought to secure a so-called outer heaven, a region and society where they could live as a community of soldiers with no allegiance to anyone but themselves. For this was the only freedom available to them in a world defined by state-sponsored violence. And Big Boss was the leader of this soldier's utopia. And if it's wrong to call him a hero, then perhaps you could say that he was a hero of hell, who creates for hell's citizens a kind of heaven that could only exist in hell, which is itself a kind of hell, but at least it does not serve the devil himself. And I also think we have to remember all of this when we reflect back on Solid Snake, the protagonist of Metal Gear Solid, and when we try to understand what it meant when Snake killed Big Boss before the incident at Shadow Moses. Throughout the events of Metal Gear Solid, Snake likes to insist that there was nothing personal about this act. Snake and Big Boss just happened to be on different sides of a war, but they were also soldiers, not politicians, and soldiers do not think about the reason why they fight. Their only job is to follow orders. Snake was only following orders when he killed his father, and that was something even Big Boss should understand, because he too is a soldier. But this entire story that Snake tells himself, about how soldiers never question their orders, and so there was nothing personal in his decision to kill Big Boss. All of this is just a delusional coping mechanism that Snake devises for himself so he can live with himself. It allows him to suppress his trauma and guilt over killing his own father. And it's certainly not a story that Big Boss would have told himself during their final confrontation. Big Boss cared about the reason why he fights. We can see that in the way he raised Sniper Wolf and in the little mercenary heaven that he created for people just like her. And so it's really only his son, Solid Snake, who refuses to think about the reason why he fights. And because he never questioned his orders, he also ended up serving one of those countries that had left Sniper Wolf for dead, back when she was a child of atrocity. Because those were the countries who wanted Big Boss dead and who sent Snake to kill him. They could not tolerate a soldier who lived outside the boundaries of their law.